As the talk is going on, please mute yourself, just in case you have any background music or sound that may interrupt with like the speaker's talk. Also, questions are always welcome for the speaker. I'll share a few links after this. We have a Slido link to pop questions as the talk is going, and then we'll ask some questions at the end. And then finally, well, we'd love to have you here for the whole meetup. If you have anything urgent that does pop up, feel free to drop off the call. We are fully understanding of that. Sponsors I would love to thank all our sponsors. They support our community and help us to host events like this, and especially the in-person events where we host them at different offices and have snacks and drinks and everything. So to start with Peach Payments, Take a Lot, Offers In, and Root. We really appreciate the support you're giving our community. And if you're interested in knowing more about what these companies do, we talk about them in our newsletter, which we'll be sending out at the end of this meetup in more detail, and you can visit their websites and follow their links. The newsletter that I've just mentioned is a tech leadership newsletter that we release once a month. It's a list of curated links that we've found over the month that help you grow and learn in your tech leadership skills. If you're interested in receiving that, you can scan that QR code, or if you are on Substack, you can just search for Tech Leadership Newsletter and sign up with your email. The email goes out after the meetup each month. So tonight at 8 o'clock, so about 2 hours from now, a newsletter will be sent out. We are also on Twitter, and there we are tweeting a little bit more frequently, so at least a link or so a day, where we're sharing content that may be useful in your learning and growth in your tech leadership journey. We also share upcoming meetups and anything interesting about what's happening in our community there. So if you are on the Twitter platform, you can find us at Tech Leadership X. If you live in South Africa, one of our sponsors, Offers In, is offering you a chance to win some swag. And I will once I send out the links again at the end of this intro, there'll be a link to a type form where you can fill in your details, and you may receive some Offers In swag for the Tech Leadership Meetup. So a lot of people who've been here before have probably received it already. And just before we get to the main speaker, we've got a quick guest speaker that's going to use a short amount of time to just pitch something for the community, for the tech community in South Africa. So I'd like to ask David Campy to say a few words, and then I'll take over right after you're done.
Cool. Hello, everyone. So for those of you who know me, for the last 10 years, you'll know I've been talking about how we can do coding clubs for young people. 10 years ago, I started a free coding club in my boardroom, and it was absolute mayhem, and it grew to many more kids. And then since then, I've been helping grow coding clubs and dojos across South Africa. The super exciting news this year is that the Raspberry Pi Foundation, funded through the profits from the little computers, but no affiliation beyond taking their money, is funding a full-time program manager for us in the Western Cape. What that means is that this time next year, we're aiming to have 150 new school-based code clubs in the Western Cape. And the teachers will be trained on how to get going there. But what would really, really help those teachers is if we could have some volunteers, like folks like me. I volunteer actually at my own daughter's school, which is very fulfilling, as well as a few other schools, help them get going. So if any of you are able to read paragraphs and have determination, and most importantly, like hack some of your daytime out from your employer, there's option for either joining remotely or even cooler to join in person to help out at a school-based code club or at a community center-based coded dojo. So if you've ever imagined kids playing football at school, they play after school and then they play league. So we have code clubs at school and then coded dojos where they can come and hang out with more computer scientists and do harder projects over the weekends. Both of those are really cool places to come and volunteer. And so I've been granted this tiny little slot now to say, please come along. figure out what we're about, see how you can add in ways you could contribute, making your school aware of it and helping them think about starting a club, getting your kids, nephews, nieces, cousins, community of interest able to come to dojos and then maybe clubs at their school, and then by directly volunteering to help support a teacher in running a club. I am going to drop a link in the chat to coderlevelup.org/codeclub. Coder Level Up is a South African not-for-profit with a mission of seeing 500,000 software developers working together in the Western Cape and being part of the change that sees that happening. And the really, really grassroots of all of that is getting this happening at the school level. Thanks for my moment.
Thank you, David. Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, we'll also reshare that link in our newsletter to help spread the word. All right, to the main event. Yeah, I would like to welcome our speaker for tonight, Luca. Luca's based out in Italy. He's the founder of Refactoring. If any of you already follow his newsletter, you know that he's been on an inspiring journey where he's built up an engineering leadership newsletter that has more than 35,000 subscribers, that releases articles weekly and with lots of content that is very inspiring and has helped a lot of engineering leaders level up. And we're very excited once he accepted to come speak with our community. And tonight he'll be sharing a talk on how to manage technical debt, which I'm sure is a topic many of us are interested in and familiar with the many battles we fought along the way. So with that, I'd like to welcome Luca and hand over the stage to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody. Really happy to join this and to be able to have this chat with all of you guys. So I will have this talk about how to manage technical debt, but I'm eager to have conversation, to receive questions even after the talk. So I will just share my screen and I will start rambling about this. So let's share. So as you might have heard, my name is Luca. Hi again. During my career, I've been mostly a co-founder and CTO for most of my career for more than 10 years in a travel startup here in Italy. We raised more than $5 million in venture capital, served more than 25 million customers here in Italy. And later I joined a larger company in the AI and translation space called translator.com as a head of engineering. But as you have heard, these days, I'm not an engineer or a manager anymore, but I'm more of a writer, which is causing a lot of embarrassment at dinners with my relatives and parents. And I run Refactoring.club, who is a newsletter, as you have heard. This picture is actually quite old. It's not 20,000 subscribers anymore. It's more than 35,000. I write public and weekly articles about how to write good software and working well together. So if you want to check it out, you can go to Refactoring.club. And out of the articles that I've written during these more than 2 years that I'm doing the newsletter, one of the most popular topics ever has been technical debt. I've written many times about that, and all the times these articles have been among the most popular in the newsletter. They have been on the first page of Hacker News, prompted a lot of conversations. A lot of people replied to me, either because they agreed with the article or they did not agree at all. So a lot of heated debates. So for tonight, I've put together many things and many ideas that I wrote about over time and condensed in a single talk. So the title of the talk is How to Manage Technical Debt. You can find these slides at refactoring.link/debt if you want to check them out later or download them. So the outline for tonight is very simple. So we will start from the first principles, from the basics. So what is technical debt? Because you will find that Sometimes we take this for granted. It's not as easy as it seems. Then two important topics, that is either how to prevent technical debt or how to pay it down if it's already there, so it's too late to prevent it. And finally, last but not least, how to prioritize and evaluate technical debt so that you can decide what to address first or later. So let's start with the first question, that is, what is technical debt? And let me make a small digression, because first of all, I believe it's one of the best metaphors in tech, like ever. One of the few things that really everybody understands, both developers and managers, product people, business stakeholders. So it's become really widespread, and it's become something that you can easily discuss in any kind of meetings. But for this fact that it is so widespread, I think that sometimes we take a little bit for granted what it really means, and we do not all really agree on that. So if you look on Google, if you search for what technical debt is, you get some kind of consensus. I mean, it looks like something that results from, you know, dirty practices or giving up what it means to write good code for more speed, you know, for faster delivery, which is of course not wrong per se, but actually I think technical debt is also about something else, because otherwise, when you think about it, if you took an engineering team that created code under the best intentions, only under the best practices, then it should come by itself that technical debt never increases, never arises in the first place, right? While I don't know about your experience, but my experience by talking with many teams is that even the very best teams, like elite engineering teams, experience a lot of technical debt sometimes over the years. So there should be something else in place that is not just about, you know, deciding consciously to giving up some clean code practices for, you know, faster development. And to help us understand, enter Ward Cunningham. So this guy is one of the fathers of Agile, one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto, and he also happens to be the one person that used for the first time the word technical debt about code, about engineering. And I've put together a small quote by Ward Cunningham, which is about the first time where he mentioned debt in relation with code, with engineering. So I will read it for you. So the quote says, if we fail to make the program aligned with what we understand to be the proper way to think about our objects, then we are going to continuously stumble into disagreement. And that would slow us down like paying interest on a loan. So paying interest on a loan is like the first time that we are talking about debt in relation with code. But when you look at this and also at other Ward Cunningham statements, it never talks about quick and dirty coding practices. It talks about understanding and disagreement. So Ward Cunningham really thinks that the most technical debt comes out of disagreement between the business and engineers that write the code. So we do not understand properly what needs to be done, and we create abstractions or systems that do not properly fit. So at some point they become a liability. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just something that happens that we need to understand and prevent. So there are mainly two situations in which such disagreement comes to happen. And we will mention this and we'll try to address this to prevent this to happen. The first situation is that the design that we created was wrong from the start. So we created a wrong design from the get-go. This happens maybe not in a way that is very apparent, very glaringly obvious, but maybe there are some abstractions that under the hood are not the best ones. So whenever some change happens, things do not fit very well, and we are dragged down by what we have written, by the systems we have created. And the second scenario is that things just move very fast. So there is a rapid evolution of the product So maybe we got things right at the beginning, but they quickly became obsolete. And so they turned from assets into liabilities, and they slow us down now. So how do we prevent technical debt? How do we limit this mismatch and disagreement in these situations? In case of wrong design, well, the obvious answer is to invest more effort in engineering design. But this is not something that you can do, without any limit. There is a ceiling to how much design can help you. Good design can help you preventing technical debt, because the good design does not protect you 100% against future changes. So based on your product maturity, based on your team size and situation, it's up to you to find the sweet spot between something that is a little bit rushy, a little bit sloppy, so the solution is wrong from the very beginning, to something where you spend too much time on designing and that eventually becomes obsolete, and so you didn't spend that time well. In the second scenario, where you are going very fast instead, you cannot spend in a way that is worth it that much time on design. So a better solution is just to embrace the fact that things will change. So the code that you create, you already know that will probably need to change. You will need to refactor it. So you rush the code out the door, but you understand that you have to learn more things over time about the business, about the product, and you put that learning back periodically over time into the software by continuously refactoring it. When this happens, the way you write code can be very different from a way that is more focused on the long term, because you already know that things will change. So your code doesn't need to be clean. It needs to be clean to refactor, which can be a very different thing. So your code becomes like those sailor notes. I don't know if you know them, that they need to hold their ground for a while, but they also need to be very easy to dismantle, because at some time you sail and you have to leave the knot behind. So this is to prevent technical debt. But what if you have already large share of technical debt in your code base, in your systems, and you want to pay it down, you want to make things better? In this case, it's another mindset altogether. And let's start with the basic question. Does it even matter? This question might seem stupid, okay? If we are all engineers maybe here, and so the answer is, of course it matters. But these conversations happen all the time. When you negotiate how you spend your time with product managers, with engineering managers, and you want to spend more time paying down technical debt, you need to be able to argue why this matters, why this is time well spent, okay? And there is a great report about technical debt that I've linked in the slides that I encourage you to read, where a friend of mine, Alex Omeyer, surveyed hundreds of engineers and companies about what they think about technical debt. So it turns out that almost 60% of companies have no process in place at all for managing technical debt. But at the same time, 2 engineers out of 3 believe that they would be able to ship up to twice as fast if they had such a process in place. So this is like a major cognitive dissonance, because on one side, most companies don't seem to do much about this, but most engineers think that instead they should. So it seems that we lack an understanding on what it means to create a process to tackle technical debt the right way, or engineers are not able to, hold their ground and convince other stakeholders that they need to do that. So let's try to create and to describe what such a process might look like. And the first thing we may notice is that not all technical debt is created equal. There are very small issues up to incredibly large initiatives. And of course, we cannot address all these things the same way. So I will start by making a very simple classification, and I will make definitions later. So let's organize technical debt into 3 major categories: small debt, medium debt, and large debt. And let's see what all these mean. Let's start with small debt. What do I mean by small technical debt? I'm talking of all those minor improvements that you can just take and complete in a few hours of your time. And there are so many. Like when there is some code maybe that doesn't have unit tests attached to it, and you can add those missing tests in little time. Or maybe you can create a simple abstraction that is useful to deduplicate some code. Or maybe you wrote some code months or years before you had some conventions that you're now adopting across the company, and you want just to adjust that piece of code to adhere to those conventions. These are all minor and not urgent improvements that you can make in a little time. In my experience, the best way to address this small debt is with the Boy Scout rule, which is always leave the code better than you found it, which was coined by Bob Martin. What does this mean? It means that you make these changes whenever you're already working on that code for some other reason, for some business reason maybe. Maybe you're making a feature improvement and you find something that doesn't have tests attached to it, and you add them in that very moment. This is efficient because you save all the context switch cost that you would otherwise pay if you were switching to that task from another task. And these are heavy costs that you pay when you think that the task in itself is trivial, maybe. So it would take very little time. So it takes maybe more time to make you understand what you need to do than to do the things altogether. But this has, of course, an upside and a downside. If the upside is the efficiency, the downside is that the timeline for making such changes is unclear. We can say it's best effort because it's tied to the fact that you have to do some other work on that code to make this happen. So this is only viable for things that are not particularly urgent and that can stay that way for maybe a long time. Let's talk now of the next category, which is medium debt. Medium debt is issues that are not that small, and you need to prioritize them because you cannot leave them that way forever. They're somewhat impactful to your product or to your customer, but you can still tackle them in a reasonable time, maybe a few hours up to a couple of days. So many examples of this again. Maybe there are some manual processes that your customer support or operation guys have to go through all the time, and you know that you can automate them with little effort. Or maybe you have to adjust and tune some infrastructure because some service has having degrading performance over time. Maybe you have to swap instances, something that is probably not too difficult to do. Or maybe you can hammer and improve your CI/CD pipeline to make things release faster in production, which would improve your productivity, but still probably requires 1 day or 2 days of work. So how should you address this? In my experience, the best way to address medium-sized maintenance is just to save some fixed time every cycle of development. Might be a week or a sprint cycle, whatever is your development cycle, but save some like 20% time or 30% time on maintenance, like on a separate swim lane that is mostly under control of developers for this. There are other approaches, of course. I mean, you can, for example, just have a single backlog of all the things and negotiate what to do all the time, every week with product managers against, for example, other product items or features. But in my experience, if you do that, it's gonna be very heavy and it takes a lot of energy and negotiation because these are things that are not easy to compare to business stuff. It's hard to compare, for example, improving the CI/CD pipeline, which doesn't have probably a very easy business KPI attached to, for example, a checkout feature that improves the conversion rate of any commerce. It's hard for engineers to advocate to do that over that, which is instead very easy for a product manager to advocate for. So if you want to avoid endless negotiations, my advice is just to negotiate once and for all that your team may spend like 20% time on maintenance and self-direct those tasks, basically. Another popular approach is to have periodic like quality sprints or quality weeks that only address these tasks. So it's like you take your whole team and the whole week they only do maintenance. This is fine. Nothing wrong with that. Many big companies do that. But the only thing that I say is that I don't think it can be your only strategy to address maintenance, because you can, when it comes to bugs and things that are time sensitive, you cannot wait, of course, for the bug week to happen maybe 1 month from now. So you really have to find a way to address this regularly, and this is usually a good way. The third category is, of course, the last one, the large debt items, the monsters that are in your code base that you know very well, you try to avoid, but you know you have to address at some point. So these are likely strategic initiatives that do not take a few days, might take a few weeks or a few months to work, like that big piece of legacy code that needs to be refactored into separate service. Or maybe you have that framework that is core to your product and you need to migrate to the next major version of something. It would be a headache, but you have to do that at some point. Or maybe there is a piece of infrastructure that is intrinsically thought not very well, and you have to rethink it for reliability or performance or any other functional quality. In these cases, I have no really magic wand or shortcuts. You need to negotiate them and consider them, planning them like regular product work. So figuring out really what is the business opportunity behind doing this as opposed to big product features. So it's important even for your maturity as a technical leader to being able to argue what are the KPIs behind some months of engineering work, because at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. So this is just based on business opportunity. You will probably plan this in quarter OKRs or planning, whatever is your style of long-term planning, but it's the only way possible to me. Now, since we have been talking about evaluating technical debt, how you can really prioritize and figure out what needs, sooner or later work. I'm a fan for this of the system that was popularized by the Riot Games teams, which is based on 3 dimensions. The first one is impact. So you should try to figure out what are the business metrics impacted by the debt, or in alternative, what is the value that you unlock by repaying it? So you either evaluate the damage or you evaluate the upside. So we made many examples before, and you can find many ideas before this. I mean, when we were talking about CI/CD pipeline, maybe you can release code, I don't know, 20% faster, and you can unlock more productivity. Or there is maybe some piece of code, some piece of the system that requires regular maintenance, and you can figure out that you're spending like 5 to 10% of your time to address these issues, and you can unlock those time for better work by your team. This is enough to trigger conversations, and this is usually enough to prioritize work. The second dimension is, of course, the effort, the cost that it takes to fix it. I'm not a fan of making very precise estimates. I mean, estimates should just be useful to decide what to do first and what to do later. So in most cases, I believe a very, not that granular scale like t-shirt sizing or story points to be the best solution for this. Really do not do more than 3 to 4 levels for considering the cost of an issue, and it should be enough to negotiate. As for the specific scale, I think it's up to you. And the third dimension, which I think is the most interesting, is contagion. So being able to answer the question, what if I'm not addressing this? What will happen in 6 months? This is very important because technical debt sometimes spreads and becomes worse and worse over time, and sometimes not. I mean, there are pieces of technical debt that maybe the code is nasty, maybe it's very ugly, but if you leave them alone, in 6 months, nothing will happen. It's bad, but it stays there. It doesn't do much harm. But there are other things that maybe look smaller, but are maybe at the center of your code base, at the center of your abstractions, and all other stuff is built on top of that. So if you do not address it, it gets worse and worse, and it will become more and more expensive to make it better. So you should do those things first. You can consider these 3 values and talk with other people in your team, with PMs, what to address first and what to address later. So thank you so much. I want to leave some space to questions and to Q&A. And again, you can find this presentation at this link, which is refactoring.link/debt. And of course, if you want to check out the newsletter, very happy. I've also left the references to everything that I mentioned. So past articles that I've written about this, the taxonomy of tech debt by Riot Games and the state of technical debt.
All right. Thank you so much, Luca, for, I think going into detail into a topic that I think every team or every person who's worked in the software industry for any significant number of time has often discussed and perhaps addressed in many different ways, depending on where they were working. And so I think from the Slido, I don't know if there's any, you just need to check. I don't know if there's just a comment, not a question. There's no direct question. I wonder if any people have questions directly, also happy to, two options. You can either just quickly type it so it pops up in the Slido, or if you're happy to just unmute and ask directly, we're also happy for that. I think that's also a very open platform. So yeah, leaving the floor open. Does anyone have any tech debt related questions or any challenges you're going through at your current company that you'd like to chat about?
I have a question. Maybe I'll break the ice. Oh, I see David just put his hand up. I think one of the challenges that I have in my team specifically is that we've sort of inherited a system or a series of systems. And so this team, this is the first time that they're like working in this code. And so even though, we've got visibility into some of it, I wouldn't say we have complete visibility. And that's put a little bit of fear into people changing things. We've come to all agree there's a substantial amount of debt that we need to sort of work through. And some of that, as you've mentioned in your talk, is like design debt, right? Is that modeling debt that sort of then surfaces some of the technical debt. Any advice for like a team that's also like uncomfortable or like fearful of making change? How do you sort of encourage a team to sort of approach technical debt when, any change could have like this ripple effect? What is the series of sort of steps to take when working in that?
I think this is a great question. I think it's particularly tricky to assess, the real value and scale of technical debt for teams who are not completely familiar with the code base, with the system, because I think as engineers, we have all this bias of, looking at things that we have not written ourselves. So maybe it's not done the way we would do, and label them as this is technical debt. Okay, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but we have this bias that we tend to think maybe something is worse just because we are not familiar with that. So I would probably try to spend some sizable time making them familiar with the system, maybe that doing incremental small changes that are not disruptive, focusing probably also on creating a release process that is fast, that you can restore from failures in a way that is fast, so that people feel safe releasing stuff before making actually big system architectural decisions that are more maybe driven by the fact that your team does not understand 100% of what's going on there and wants to convert to something that they're more comfortable with, rather than the fact that the system itself is like it's broken or it's too much legacy. Well, of course it depends on your situation. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yes, it does. And also, thank you very much for the talk. It was great. I didn't say that earlier, but yes.
Thank you, Roberto. So I see a question here.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I think. Yeah. Go ahead and take the
David,
on.
I think David had raised his hand before, so maybe we go with David first.
Sure. So yeah, again, really nice talk, and I love to focus on systematizing tech debt. It's so obvious in retrospect. It's one of those things that I hadn't actually thought to make so clear. That process, perhaps helps from an engineering perspective, but I'm hearing you when you say it that we know it's a problem, it's there, and it sounds like there may be sponsoring reasons or thoughts in your head as to why we aren't actually fixing it. Like what is it that causes us not to be doing it? And if you have some strategies to kind of do, I mean, this one simplifies it. It maybe lowers the floor and systemizes getting it done. Some of the hacks that I've tried is reframing it to technical investment options, right? Rather than debt, because no one likes paying off debt, but we'll talk it in all hands about how we invested in our technology. Or putting it into a junior developers one-on-one mentorship call to say, come, next time come up with how you did the Boy Scout rule. Like, that's what you need to do. You need to come back and say how you made something better. That's your quest for the next while. But I'm wondering, like, on the one hand, why you believe we don't do it? Is it just unsexy, or is there some sort of a framework? And then is there some hacks that you get to get us around to doing it?
So you mean why, let's say as an industry, we are not doing enough for handling tech debt before it's too late? I mean, before the problem gets, too big. I think that's because the damage, caused by technical debt, like the interest you pay on the loan to stay in the metaphor, is just not as visible as the other opportunities of stuff that you can develop for the product. Like, again, the opportunity of, adding new stuff in the inventory of an e-commerce in terms of business upside, or making, the checkout leaner, is just, easier to understand and maybe to measure than paying down some abstract technical debt, fixing something that is not easy to understand by non-technical stakeholders that is happening under the hood. So I think a prerequisite that we should really, nurture and foster is to being very aware of, since most technical debt damage comes in the form of, the time that you spend as a team working around it, or handling it instead of going faster. It works usually very well to be very aware of how you are spending your time as a team. I mean, how much of your time goes into maintenance, into things that you need to do just to keep the lights on, as opposed to, time that you can spend on new features. So being able to track, where your engineering investment is going, and so how much of your time is actually spent on things that you would rather not do and you wouldn't do if you had paid for that debt, is usually the strongest argument in favor of big tech debt initiatives. I'm talking of big initiatives because, of course, when it comes to, the Boy Scout rule or fixed time for maintenance, those are things that are, can be more self-directed, less need for negotiation, as opposed to, the big 3 months initiative for refactoring a whole service. So do I pick questions myself?
So I think there are a couple in Slido that came first before the ones in the chat. So we'll get to the ones in the Zoom chat. I think let's go through the 3 that are in the Slido, then the ones in the Zoom chat. So one is, should we assign KPIs to technical debt?
I mean, ideally, yes. I think ideally, yes, but I think it depends. I mean, my feeling about this is not very different from, the mindset you should adopt for regular features. I mean, if it's a small improvement and it's obvious, it's more the overhead of trying to figure out the right KPI and then following up on that to realize if you are really improving that, than actually the effort of doing the thing. So if it's like 1 day work, 2 days work, I mean, and it's obviously a good thing to do, you should have, a mature enough culture in your product engineering organization that lets you do that, because you personally know it's the right thing. Of course, this doesn't stand for big projects and initiatives to pay down technical debt. In that case, it's healthy, of course, to pit them against big product features, for example. And just like you have KPIs about product features, you have KPIs about big tech debt paying down initiatives. And this might be, velocity of your overall team, might be how fast you release to production, might be how much time you spend on maintenance, might be performance to the final user. Of course, the more the impact that you're able to demonstrate is, perceivable by the final user, the more convincing you probably are. But of course, even, like in the previous thing we were discussing, even, if you're spending a lot of engineering time on something that is ultimately not valuable, that is a pretty convincing argument. So TLDR, you should assign KPIs, especially for big tasks, while for smaller tasks, you can sometimes just go faster doing them without negotiating KPIs if you're able to.
All right, thank you. Thank you for addressing that question. And the next one is, so the question is, I'm afraid of the Boy Scout rule because engineers sometimes change things without giving test engineers a clue that code has changed. Is this a legitimate fear? So yeah, so I think this question is coming from a test engineer in a company where there's a structure where I think they pass things to the test engineers. Yeah.
Seems right. It shouldn't be a legit fear because in theory, for the Boy Scout tool, you should just change stuff whenever you're already changing something on that code anyway. So since you're already making changes, the test engineers should test that the behavior of that code anyway. And so they're testing also, as a byproduct, what you're changing because of the Boy Scout tool. And the second reason is that the Boy Scout tool mostly applies to things that are under the hood. So you're like adding tests or, refactoring an abstraction, something that shouldn't change the behavior that looks like, how it looks like to the final user. So you should, of course, as a test engineer, you should test it, but you should find things to behave largely the same.
All right. Once again, thank you for taking that one. And the last one in Slido, then we'll move to the ones in the Zoom chat is, this one is coming from Zach. And the question is, I might have missed it, but what has been your best or favorite approach when explaining technical debt to a product or executive team?
Look, I think the best success I had, and also speaking with many engineering teams that helped me actually writing the newsletter articles, because in the newsletter articles, I talk about my experience, but also that of other teams that I interview for this, is the approach that I covered in the slides. So working executives and product people across, the taxonomy of the technical debt, saying, here's our strategy. Very small pieces of technical debt. We are not losing time prioritizing and putting them into backlog. Whenever we have some time for the Boy Scout tool, we're doing them. So you will never even notice. Medium piece of technical debt, we should just agree that as an engineering team, we need, for example, 20% of time for maintenance. And we believe that by spending this, we will keep things under control. This is a very, if you're able to argument this is a very mature approach that is usually appreciated by executives and product team. It's also very efficient because you negotiate it once and for all, so nobody then argues about it ever later. And then you just explain that for big stuff, you will also always discuss them against other product features. So I think this, tiered approach with different tiers to technical debt is what is best appreciated, best received by non-technical people.
Awesome, thank you. And swinging over to the ones in the Zoom chat. The next one is, in terms of organizational structure, who would you say has the primary responsibility for identifying and managing debt? The engineering manager, product manager, or the Scrum Master? Yeah,
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And again, it depends on the size of the debt item. I think stuff that goes under the Boy Scout rule should be totally self-directed by engineers. Given that you have, good engineering principles in place and people are aligned on what it is worth of their time and what not, because of course, I mean, it's not like when they're in the context of changing a small piece of copy, they should refactor the whole the whole issue because of the Boy Scout rule. But given you have alignment on that, the time spent on the Boy Scout rule should be totally bottom up and self-directed. So no overhead for engineering managers, PMs, etc. For medium-sized maintenance, for stuff that goes into, let's say, the maintenance lane, I think engineering managers are the best candidates for owning this. Usually you have maybe a separate backlog for maintenance and people can take stuff from there. But this is, again, not something that goes through product managers. Maybe they can stay aligned looking at the backlog every now and then, but it's not on them. While instead, when it comes to large initiatives, that comes down to negotiation between EMs and PMs, of course, engineering managers and tech leads. Then it depends, of course, on the roles and responsibilities, how they're organized in your team, but they should advocate for doing that and negotiate it with PMs or stakeholders, if there are any. And so it's about agreement in the team.
All right, thank you. And second last one is, got any advice for someone who just started at a new company on how to, or if I should approach tech debt in my DevOps role?
I think the best advice for anybody who's joining a new company is always to talk with as many people as possible. I mean, especially if you are in the DevOps role, so you really thrive in collaborating with people, in making people life easier, right, and more productive. Trying to understand, having maybe many one-on-ones, what are the biggest challenges of these people in their work? Maybe there is already, a big list of stuff. Maybe there isn't. So be the guy that knows, I mean, what people care the most, and then figure out if this is anybody's priority. Maybe there is already some structure or process around this. Maybe there are things that nobody's thinking of. So try to understand really what are the bottlenecks, what are the biggest pains for people, and work backwards from there, I would say.
All right, thank you. And final question is, I'm curious to know how one could introduce concepts such as technical debt to legacy organizations that are new to the tech and agile environment. Are there any experiences you've had with large organizations in terms of making them aware of this and how to go about managing it?
Yeah. I think this is very hard to answer in a way that, one size fits all, because every large organization is different, even legacy ones. So what sometimes work in large organizations is taking like a small team of people who you feel like are more receptive to some new process that you want to introduce and you think it's beneficial, would be eventually beneficial to the whole company, and trying to implement it with that team and get to a point where this can be really a success story. You have some measurable success, maybe their productivity increased, maybe they're releasing more often, faster in production. So there is really some measurable increased quality of the engineering process. So you can go to other directors or executives and show the success and say, we can do this with more teams and build more trust and influence to enlarge the scope of the initiative, the process, to doing that with more teams. So land and expand and building small success stories that build trust towards you by executives is sometimes a good strategy with large orgs.
All right. That covers all the questions. Once again, Luca, thank you so much for addressing all the questions. Yeah, I think that's like probably one of the sessions that had the most questions, so very interactive. And once again,
Really
thank you for
happy.
the talk. Thank you for the talk and joining us all the way from Italy. I'm sure our community is very appreciative of you joining us. Yeah, you're always welcome to join. And if we do ever have something much bigger in South Africa, yeah, we'll definitely make a plan and love to have you come and speak.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. As customary from the tech leadership community, with all the speakers that join us, we give them a gift, which is any book that you would like to read. This is sponsored by Benny's company, actually, Matchbox Solutions. So he'll be in touch after the talk via email, and we can let you know how you prefer to receive your book, whether it's via Audible or anything. But like, you can let him know whatever book you've been thinking of reading next, and yeah, just a token of appreciation to say thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, great questions. So happy to join again anytime in the future.
All right. And yeah, and to everyone else, I've just dropped the links for Tech Leadership Spaces once again in the chat, if you want to copy that before you jump off and close off. And yeah, thank you to everyone, quite a number of familiar names that have joined us before, and all the new people. We hope you join us once again. As usual, our next one will be in person in Cape Town. It will be at the Root offices that are in Department. We'll share the details as we get closer to that event, and we're really excited for that. And yeah, finally, just once again, wanted to say thank you to our sponsors, Peach Payments, Take a Lot, Offers and Root. And sign up for the newsletter if you'd like to receive it later on. I think that is all. So we can call it there. Have a good evening further to everyone, and see you soon. Thank you.